Here's something I don't need to tell you. Australia has a housing problem. If you saw my last video on housing, you might remember this terrifying graph. House prices have quadrupled over 20 years at the same time as wages have barely doubled. But you don't need the graph because you're living the graph. You know that it is getting harder to buy a house than it was for your parents and grandparents. You know that it's getting harder to rent as well, and you may well feel like the system is rigged against you. But how did we get here? How did housing become so expensive in the first place? And what can we do about it? Australia's housing affordability problem goes back decades, so we need to go back in time a little bit to figure out the culprits. And believe it or not, the problem actually begins with a story of success. In the second half of the 20th century, Australia, like a lot of other countries, became a lot richer. In the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, normal people enjoyed a standard of living that would have been completely unthinkable a couple of generations ago. They had cars, they had washing machines, they had fridges, and they had big houses. It was the rise of the quarter-acre block in suburbia. As we headed into the 21st century, this continued and was joined by some other culprits. Low interest rates, which let people borrow more, a boom in migration, which added to the competition for housing, and generous tax settings, which encouraged people with money to own not just one house, but a whole portfolio of investment properties. To put it simply, more people with more money who could borrow more and were encouraged to do so. The result is a huge increase in demand for housing. On the flip side, the supply of housing has not kept up. Here, one culprit is physical limits. In Sydney, you eventually run into the oceans on one side and mountains on the others. But even when cities do sprawl, houses on the outer fringes are often a long way from where most of the jobs are. And they can also lack services that would make these suburbs more livable, like efficient public transport. The old Australian dream of a big suburban house on a quarter-acre block just isn't scaling to our larger population. The alternative of building up more apartments and higher density living has also run into obstacles, in part because of the objections of those same suburban homeowners. Local councils objecting to new higher density developments has been a significant obstacle to more new housing. It's this combo, more demand without more supply, that has landed us where we are. Add in a decade where wages have barely increased, and it's little surprise that young Australians are doing it tough. In the 1980s, the typical age of someone buying their first house was 27, but now it's moving well into the 30s. This is not a uniquely Australian story. It's happening all over the world in many developed countries, but Australia is a bit of an outlier. Our rates of housing stress, that is, people spending very large portions of their income on their housing costs, are above the average for the developed world. The Australian dream is starting to look a little bit like a nightmare. Last week, we learned that things might keep getting worse. There are a number of problems that face us right now. Our ability to build more housing is hampered by obstacles in the construction sector. The skyrocketing cost of building materials and labour shortages are pushing many construction companies out of business. Meanwhile, our demand continues to rise. Migration has surged again since the pandemic, and our housing needs are changing as more people look for home offices so that they can work from home. The gap between housing demand and supply is set to widen over the next decade. So what can we do? Unfortunately, there are no simple fixes. Building more housing will obviously be part of the solution, but the barriers in construction and continued objections from local councils suggest that that will be difficult to fix quickly. It's going to require some hard conversations. And in the meantime, we're going to likely focus more on some of the more urgent consequences of this housing crisis. Not just people who are struggling to buy, but people who are struggling to have anywhere to live at all. The latest figures suggest that about 300,000 people are in severe housing need. That is, they're either homeless or they're struggling to pay their rent. At the same time, there is a shortage of government-funded social housing. Social housing as a share of total housing has gone backwards since 2006, and the latest estimates suggest that almost 200,000 people are waiting in the queue for social or affordable housing. The federal government has a proposal before Parliament to increase the amount of social housing that is built, but at the moment it isn't supported by either the Coalition or the Greens, the latter arguing that it doesn't go far enough. This is an issue that is unlikely to go away and is only going to come into sharper focus as our housing crisis continues.